In psychotherapy, we try to perhaps improve, look at our shadow element, and look at the nitty-gritty. It's almost like traveling on a path, on a horse or cycling, whereas Zen would be more a view from a plane.
What were the formative experiences that led you to become a psychotherapist?
I have been brought up a Catholic, so I had like a really strong faith. I believe as a young man, I really was taken with the whole religious teaching. Jesus looked sort of a revolutionary, a very interesting, charismatic figure. And then they changed into politics, wanting to change the world, wanting the world to be a better place, and feminism. My girlfriend at the time was a feminist. And Nietzsche comes along. So the moment I read Nietzsche, it's almost like taking the rug from under my feet, eroding all kind of certainty. This is how we do it. If you only do ABC. But also there was a strong existential element, a strong loss, because at the age of 18, when I started university, I lost my mother. She died young. She was 51. She died of cancer. So I think there was very much the atmosphere. And I didn't quite, 18, I think, is very young to lose somebody. I didn't quite understand it. It was a shock, but I didn't really know. So reading Nietzsche made it even stronger, this thing that maybe life doesn't have a solid ground, that the things we think are steady and known and certain can just go in a moment. So that was the background, I think, but that spurred me to want to live and study and be. Paradoxically, it was like it brought an enthusiasm, like an urgency. Oh my God. So any moment we can go, an illness or whatever, an accident. So what am I doing with my life? What's important? So philosophy really, really helped. So psychotherapy came much later in my life. It came out of a personal need for sorting myself out, having a moment of uncertainty, confusion, emotional pain. Like many of us, I started seeing a therapist. Now it's a kind of almost a cliche, the wounded healer, but it became very real for me. Like I was 7 years with my therapist, and sometime after the third year or so, he said something like, you know what? I think you'd be good at doing something like this. That was the first seed. And but even then, the interest was also mixed to something else. So there was a personal element, wanting to understand myself, you could say, inner life and others, but also wanting to link it to psychology and philosophy. My study, which always continued, led me to psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, and I thought the best way is to try it firsthand. So that was the other sort of stream, the other element of interest. Do you see what I mean?
And then how did Zen come into the picture?
Well, Zen was, again, it took a while. So I always loved Zen as a kind of philosophy. It was paradoxical, funny, beautiful, painting. So from early age, in my 20s, I loved the Zen literature. It felt like something alien, but very attractive, very interesting. So it started as reading, I remember the sayings of Zen Master Joshu, paradoxical statements like, wow, what is this? Almost like absurdist at the time. So it started like that. And then it had a detour because I was interested in, I wanted to travel, I wanted to go far. So the first option, the first chance to go to India, I went to India and studied and practiced in an ashram on and off for 12 years. It wasn't quite Zen. There was a Zen element in the sense of silent sitting meditation with nothing else. So that was the first flavor. And then much later, I'm talking about now 96, so nearly 30 years ago, that's when my Zen training started by accident. I saw an advert for a Zen retreat. I said, okay, this looks interesting. Maybe I just go for a weekend rather than a week. I started the weekend. I stayed the whole week. I did the next retreat. Before I knew it, I was totally involved. And it was a strange thing. It was, maybe we'll talk about it more. Suddenly it wasn't so much an intellectual thing. It was more like it really broke my heart open. It's like sitting meditation there, like something happened physically, like I felt very, very open, tearful, tears of joy and sorrow, and a strange mix. I said, what's this? And also the sense of community, solidarity. So it really appealed to me.
I think what you're describing is what people refer to as a spiritual awakening of a sort. And in my experience, along with that nutcracking came a very strong emotional response to that. Relief was a big one. Huge amount of relief, as if I've been carrying something my whole life that I could then put down. How would you describe in your own words the feeling that was attached to that experience?
I mean, in my understanding, that can begin to happen only if there is some kind of thirst, some kind of genuine search, and perhaps some kind of experience of dissatisfaction, of pain, perhaps. And I would say the way in is by accepting the element of distress or dissatisfaction and to allow it to percolate and to be open to it and say, okay, this is what's happening to me right now. So usually if it's to be real, it starts from you could say an existential experience of something is up, something is not quite right. And then the way in would be, okay, can I be curious about this? Can I be open to it? Even if the whole of my being, or the person's being, say, in this case, we want to push it away. Can I be open to this and stay with it? That would be the first step. And it's not easy because normally, and it's understandable, everybody joining, say, spiritual practice, Zen in particular, also other practices would want something that makes things better. And that can happen, but the first step is usually accepting the dissatisfaction, or what the Buddha calls dukkha, kind of something. There's the wheel of the movement of our life is stuck at some level. The journey is bumpy. So those two elements, the thirst, this wanting to know something, and then the invitation to open up and to say, okay, this is the situation. Okay, let's start.
And what was your experience then of opening up?
There is a formula, it still works for me. It was feeling my heart breaking and thinking, oh my God. And realizing that when the heart breaks, is open. And it leaves aside the defenses, the usual armory, and there is an openness to my own experience, and then an openness to others. And the realization, this is important. Okay, what I'm experiencing, other people, I can feel that we are in the same boat. So that's the experience, I would say, in a nutshell. And there is more to it. There are other things, Zen involves also sometimes Koan practice. There are certain things you inquire, study, but I would say an opening that feels like breaking. I say, oh my God, what's happening to me? And then this becomes an opening to others and to my own experience, becoming more fully accepting of my humanity and the humanity of others. So it usually linked to accepting my ups and downs, my imperfections, the sorrow, which is the flip side of joy. So you could say it is an existential awakening. We can call it spiritual, but to me, Zen is very down to earth. It's very much like you sit, you keep sitting. And even if you have some insight, you say, okay, that's good. The teacher would say, continue to meditate, continue because this is good, but don't get too enamored or too hooked on that experience. So even to call it spiritual sometime, I mean, I'm fine with that word totally, but it's it could make it sound as something higher than the human dimension. And in fact, with Zen, which is a kind of shorthand for teachings of the Buddha, is to become more human in a way.
So when it comes to understanding what Zen is and where it came from, where's the best place to begin?
Historically, there is a legend, a history, the myth. An Indian monk, Bodhidharma, goes to China to transmit his experience. And there are many anecdotes. People are interested in that. They're wonderful anecdotes. So it starts with Bodhidharma, this mysterious, legendary Indian monk who may or may have not existed. But the famous one, he goes to the emperor. The emperor recognizes this is a holy man of some sort. He builds temple. He gives great gifts and donation, and then he says, "What will this do to me?" You know, he was thinking in a future life, in a reincarnation, and Bodhidharma said, "Nothing at all, nothing at all. What matters is the giving." And also, even more famous, the dialogue between him and the emperor. The emperor says, "Who is this standing in front of me? Who are you?" And he says, "I don't know. I don't know." Okay, he asks, "What is the essence of your teaching? What is the essence of Zen?" And the famous response is, "Vast space and nothing holy about it." He then transmits the teaching to four of his disciples. That's the beginning or the birth of Chan in China. Then Chan, thanks to various other teachers, particularly Dogen, moves to Japan, takes on a cultural Japanese form, it becomes Zen. So India, China, Japan, then all the Japanese great teachers come to the West, also Korea is part of it, to the States, and then to Europe, and then to the present day. So it evolves, and each time you could say it takes cultural garments, but there is an essence that perhaps travels through it. When I was ordained as a Zen priest, I was given this different layers of clothing. In the layers of clothing, is the whole history. First, you have a kimono, which is like a Japanese thing, so honors the Japanese form. Then there is a long tunic, which comes from the Chinese, the Chan. And then finally, the kesa, which is the Indian, you see the Indian monks wear this on top. So the whole, it's like you're wearing a whole history that simmers and travels through generations. And then comes to the present day. And the question then is, okay, what is the essence of that? And when we come down to it, it's really sitting with an attitude of openness, with an attitude, you could say, of faith, or you can call it a trust, trusting in oneself, in the experience, and trusting in life.
If you had to distill Zen into a handful of essential principles or ideas, what would they be?
Okay, I will answer with a caveat that the principles that I will express now are to be taken with a pinch of salt. They are fingers pointing to the moon. At the heart of Zen practice, maybe that's a principle. There is a deep reluctance to attach oneself to principles. All the same, the question is legitimate, and I will do my best to answer it. So, self, no self, both of them. So, one principle would be an ability for the practitioner to move freely between what we call an absolute dimension and a relative dimension. The absolute dimension is the dimension where most spiritual paths sometime, I say this respectfully, get stuck. The experience that there is no self, that there is a complete open space. Some people would say that there is only God and nothing else. There's only nature, there's only spaciousness, and there is no self. So that's a good, wonderful experience that the practitioner sooner or later bumps into through dedicated practice. And then integrating that, we move from the absolute into the relative. And that means there is a self. We go back to the self. Perhaps a more spacious sense of self. Some people would say, some Rinzai teachers would say, an attenuated self. The volume is turned down, but there is a self nevertheless. Because we need to function in the world, we need to work, like you and I, we need to relate to people, to jostle, to be in the hustle and bustle of the world, to say, when people say, who are you, who you are, I have to say, my name is so-and-so, this is my job. The principle is this: to have enough flexibility to move between the experience of the absolute, of selflessness, of spaciousness, and the relative, the experience of the self, of functioning as a self in the world, and to keep moving from one to the other. Playfulness, I would say, between those two, and not to get stuck to one or the other. Another principle would be not knowing. Now, not knowing is kind of popular in humanistic therapy, in existential therapy, is part of the common parlance. That's a good thing. Socrates in the West, he would say, I only know one thing that I do not know. I am not convinced that it's the same as in Zen. Let me illustrate one particular dialogue. Okay, the student goes to see the teacher. The teacher says, the Zen teacher says, where have you been? Oh, I've been on a pilgrimage. What is the meaning of a pilgrimage? The student says innocently, says, I don't know. And the teacher's answer is, not knowing is the most intimate. So to go on a pilgrimage, in this case, to venture out, to go on a search, on a quest, on a spiritual quest, you could say, and not quite knowing what that is, and not quite realizing and knowing what the experience itself is the most closest we can get to the experience itself. Of course, it doesn't mean that we don't try to explain it or share it with people or give it a name. The paradox in Zen is that I can't say it. I mean, you ask me great questions. I don't really know the answer, but the invitation in the tradition, in the Zen tradition, is you have to say something. Try and say something. That's why we study koans, I would say. So what did we have? Relative and absolute, flexibility, not knowing. I would say an understanding of ethics, understood not so much as rules or commandments, do this, don't do that, but more an ethics that come from the joy of meditation practice. There is an expression, Jijuyu Sanmai, which means a self-generating joy. When we sit and sit and sit in meditation with a genuine, sincere intention, something really bubbles up. It's a kind of a joy, and it's a joy to be with others and share with others. And that brings an ethics. The ethics, if it comes up, if it flowers like that, it cannot be exploiting others. It cannot be dominating others. It cannot be competing or rival, although competition is a human thing. What flowers is to do good, to do the right thing. So it's an ethics that come out of from inside out. And it coincides with, you would say, most ethical guidelines, but it doesn't come from the outside. It comes more from a genuine inner experience. That doesn't mean the Zen practitioner is perfect. It's just the emphasis is there of you could call it. I call it ethics of joy, and personally, my inspiration there is not so much Zen, but Spinoza, a great, you could say, spiritual, but also in a way materialist, spiritualist, very, very interesting thinker, Spinoza, who would speak about joy as the flowering of acceptance of our experience, which is what meditation allows us to do. And then I would say the sense of to take the experience of the Buddha. When the Buddha experienced enlightenment, awakening under the Bodhi tree, sitting the whole night and seeing the star disappearing at dawn, the first words he said, I and every other being, living being, are awakened. So the experience is communal. The experience is communal. We meditate together, but also this thing that we call self is not so solid, and it's already interconnected at a deep level with others, with the life of others. So I would say that's the other principle. What should we call it? Sangha is the Buddhist word. Community, a strong sense of community and solidarity. We are in this together.
From that perspective, where do I end and where does the world begin?
I'm tempted to say, oh, it's always in the middle. It's always in the middle. It's always in between. It's a very good question. I don't know. Already asking it means you have a sense of porousness. I think it's a good thing to bear in mind, to hold in our experience. Where do I end? And, many of us in my generation experienced that with, LSD. It was a useful thing for some of us because it meant stepping out of a certain frame that is too rigid. But of course, meditation and Zen practice allow us to do that in a natural way. So I would leave it at that. Where do I end? Where do others begin? I wouldn't even attempt to answer it because it's a brilliant question in itself.
Where does the confluence of Zen philosophy and psychotherapy begin?
You could say one of the principles really in Zen would be, can you accept that we are already Buddha? That we are already, the fully functioning human being, that we are already actualized, that we're already, whatever the terminology would be, the confluence could be there, and perhaps it would be a paradox. So in psychotherapy, we try to perhaps improve, look at our shadow element, and look at the nitty-gritty. It's almost like traveling on a path, on a horse or cycling, whereas Zen would be more a view from a plane, whereas everything is fine as it is. Everything is absolutely fine. So perhaps the confluence would be that. To bring the Zen element would be, yes, there is loads of room for improvement. There is a lot of things that we need to look at. There is maybe childhood. There is maybe relationship. How do we relate to one another? Intimacy. Freud would say love and work. And then the Zen element would say, on some level, however imperfect, however difficult, this is fine and good as it is. And I think that adds an element of acceptance that perhaps would help the therapeutic process. Perhaps the therapeutic process can't start in earnest until I accept and I appreciate where I find myself in. And this is the difficulty. My therapeutic work, you may experience something similar. It's a kind of, I don't like it. I don't want it. Give me something else. Let's do, the first step has to be, this is my life. This is where I am. And Zen practice helps us to say, this life, however difficult and painful, is already the life of the Buddha. And it can get better. That's the paradox. So those two elements, I think one needs the other, because Zen alone can't do it. Psychotherapy training and my own therapy came after Zen practice. I thought Zen could solve everything. It clearly can't. But it can give you a great panoramic insight on your life, certainly on my life.
Just going back to this idea of, or maybe considering the two ideas of either this kind of attitude of acceptance or the attitude of not knowing, are you able to share a story that illustrates the therapeutic benefit of someone onboarding those ideas and how that might have changed their view or the course of their journey?
This was quite a while ago when I used to do placement. I was very fresh with ideas learned from Carl Rogers, finding an internal locus of evaluation, actualizing, and so forth. So I was working in a placement with a young man. He was in his late 20s, early 30s. He was Pakistani, if I remember, and Muslim. The religion was Muslim. So something happened, a bereavement in his family, and members of his family and close friends didn't support or respond to his level of grief that he experienced. And so that really kicked in a crisis for him, an existential crisis. We started questioning family ties, relations, friendships. He started questioning also his religion. He was living with his girlfriend upstairs from his family. So we're all in the same building. So he was thinking of moving out. So I thought, okay, it sounds like he is moving towards a particular form of individuation. He'll move out. He'll create his own family, or maybe not. Even the relationship was a little bit shaky. Maybe he will do his own thing. And everything moved in that direction. Towards the last few sessions we did, there was a change of heart. And he said, this has been so useful working with you, because he helped me realize how much I value my family and how much support I can get from my belief system if I really take it to heart. And it kind of completely surprised me, because I thought, I don't remember saying anything of the sort, but somehow working together, it was a change. You could say it was a form of individuation, it was a form of positive change, or whatever you want to call it, but in a direction that I hadn't envisioned. I envisioned this guy is going to move out of the religion, of the family, and he's going to do his thing, and maybe, become more secular in his outlook. Instead, it made him look more intimately and more deeply at the belief system that he already had. And for me, just now, as I say this, it ties in with something. I was very sort of interested in Christianity, very involved as a young man. I just left it. I became very secular in my view for a very long time. I still am. I got involved with, for example, with the Unitarian Church locally, and I went to a Good Friday ceremony. I got involved with them because I do Zen workshops for them. They're very open to these ideas. And the experience of the Good Friday ceremony there was so moving and so heartbreaking and so heart-opening. And I can't explain it. It wasn't like Catholic Mass. It didn't have all the paraphernalia, but there was an openness in the room of experience. So what am I saying? That perhaps the unexpected experience, the opening can be in a direction that we hadn't foreseen. It could be, rather than having to leave completely a certain set of beliefs and worldviews, it could make them more intimately rich. I think somewhere Jung spoke about this, didn't he? There is an inner experience of religion and there is a more social conformity. You're going to mass every Sunday, sort of thing, and that's it. But there is no sense of inner transformation. The second thing just came out as I'm talking to you, and the first, it was a surprise for me. I think it was also a surprise for the client, regaining his sense of faith in a new way through some kind of acceptance. Metanoia, the change of heart. Ronnie Lang, an existential practitioner, talked about that. The metanoia, the change of heart, that can happen through therapeutic work, it can happen through spiritual practice, it can happen through Zen practice.
What does Zen have to teach us about resistance?
Do you mean resistance as in psychoanalysis, the patient resists the healing?
I mean, I think it's maybe like the other side of the coin to acceptance. So it's kind of working through the resistance to experience, or the resistance to pain, or the resistance to embarrassment, or whatever it is. What does Zen have to teach us about sitting with resistance and working through it?
The first thing I would say about resistance, it is there for a reason, and it has to be, I don't know about has to be, but it would be good if we honor it. And it's something clever. We are quite clever beings by creating situations perhaps that keep us away from flourishing. I would say in Zen meditation, in Zen practice and philosophy, that happens through slow erosion of the resistance, the barrier. Some teachers would say it's not that we have to destroy resistance or even destroy the self or annihilate it. The task is not to build it in the first place every minute. So we build the resistance every moment. And we keep piling up like brick upon brick. We create this wall. So not doing it, in one word, relinquishment, relaxing, acceptance. Accepting what? Right now, I feel resistant. Fine. And one work I did with my then Zen teacher in the 90s was to work in meditation, but also to speak to different parts of the psyche. Let's speak to resistance rather than speaking to Hari. Say, if I were to ask, I want to speak to resistance directly. So it's a whole kind of exercise similar to Gestalt, where you move in a position where you become resistant. We leave aside the subject, the self, the ego self, and speak a resistance and engage. Maybe resistance doesn't want to talk, is resisting, but maybe wants to tell us something, maybe can convey us something. And what we find in that is that it has something interesting to tell us. So it really, I think it boils down to respecting resistance itself, honoring it, being with it, sitting with it. That already creates a certain relaxation, a certain distance. And then if we realize, I don't need this, let me try and let it go. But it's a very delicate thing. I am not this sort of therapist who would gratuitously challenge clients. I think respect and honoring their pace is very important. Even in Zen practice, Zen is a reputation of being fierce and so forth. And this is true. But it's also, if the intervention is too quick, the chick won't come out of the egg, will be dead. If this is my perhaps funny analogy. It has to come, the packing has to come at the right time. The resistance has to be respected, honored, and then let go.
So thinking about that as maybe a principle of therapeutic practice, the need for patience. and the need for trusting that the person is where they need to be and that resistance isn't inherently bad. What could be another one that you could share?
One that I'm very keen on, that I see using a lot, particularly in my group work, has to do with working with difficult emotion. So the client typically comes in the session and says, I feel totally angry. This guy parks the bike in this place and whatever. So dealing with a difficult, overpowering emotion. So the principle behind that comes from Zen practice. It also comes from Spinoza. If I can stay with a difficult emotion, express it by all means, not acting out on it, not throwing things at people, but speaking about it, expressing it, perhaps dramatize it. I use movement as well. A Buto dancer and practitioner. Buto is a very interesting Japanese practice as well, where you can become this energy, anger, and express it and go through and articulate it. The end result is, that's my principle, joy. Any powerful natural force, emotion, and feeling, which can be potentially overwhelming and even disturbing to the person, if fully allowed to do its thing, not acting out, but fully allowed to do its thing, to be felt in the body. Like the body in anger is hot, and maybe the heart is racing and so forth. If it's allowed to be felt and gone through, the end result is joy, because there's tremendous energy. It's rechanneled into something else. And you could say that's a kind of a Zen tantric practice. Tantric understood not so much in the bedroom, but tantric understood as working with really difficult stuff, and working through it together. So that's a principle. It's a kind of a trust that the person has to experience that, and that there is something in store which could be really, really helpful to flourish, rather than managing it, which I think this is what psychotherapy is risking to become at the moment, like a sort of a management strategy, rather than a more passionate engagement with where the person is at, and respect.
Do you ever recommend any sort of Zen-inspired rituals or practices to clients? And if so, what are they?
Zazen, silent sitting, and if the person is inclined, and if they suggest it, if they want it, sometime we spend 10 minutes meditating together. It's a ritual in itself. And then it means at home having a particular space, if possible, a time of day when person sits in silence. And the other is, I haven't suggested it, but it's one that it's useful to mention. I'm thinking aloud, is bowing practice or prostrations. It's the very physical manifestation of relinquishment. You might have a little altar at home with a Buddha. It could be a plant you love. It could be a symbolic thing that stands for a great principle that the one that I greatly value, love or solidarity. It's a kind of a letting go. It's like in prostrating or bowing to the ground, we let go and we say, there is something above me. There's something bigger than me. There is this principle of love. There is the Buddha. There is the beauty of nature. It's a very, very, very powerful thing. I suggested it to clients who are already edging that way, already inclined, already have a spiritual practice, and they ask for it. To be honest with you, I try not to conflate my Zen priest persona, so to speak, or my Zen element with the therapy. I try to weirdly keep them apart, because maybe some people will be put off. So I don't want this Buddhist stuff, I just come here for therapy, so fair enough. But some people, if they're inclined, then I say Zazen, And then bowing practice. So we do it up to 108 times. It's powerful stuff, I tell you. Most people looks weird, like, what are you doing? What are you doing, But anyway, it's a somatic practice that can help relinquish. Example, in relationship. A couple, they argue, there is an impasse, there is a stuckness there. Okay, let's pause for a moment. Let's talk. You talk first, I talk first. Let's share. Okay. And now let's take in turn to fully bow to one another.
Yeah, because there's something always very powerful about the embodiment of an attitude or a feeling, the embodiment of stillness or the cultivation of stillness is something like meditation, which people would understand. Maybe bowing is similar, but you're expressing maybe surrender or relinquishment, as you say.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. I like that.
What's your vision for the future of psychotherapy? What needs to change?
Okay. Now, this is very dear to me. I have, over the last couple of years, taught some courses, hybrid courses on what I call affect therapy. Simply put, a shift in focus from the self of the client to the affect. What is affect? It's the current of life that manifests at this moment in a room between two people. So you could say if a shift in emphasis towards the general mood or affect or atmosphere of ambience or what the person brings. Of course, the self of the person, their concern, their worries are important. But the idea is, what is the general affect that's being communicated here? And how can I capture it or translate it or attempt to respond to it? And it has element of what psychoanalysts used to call the unconscious, because it's pre-verbal, it's more subtle, but it's not quite like the unconscious. So that would be one way. And maybe one way to illustrate it would be, if you are my supervisor, I wouldn't say, my client is called John and he wants to split up with his wife. I would simply speak as John, as my client. You would register all the responses, bodily responses, emotions, feelings that come up for you, associations, memories of a movie, of something you read, of something a friend told you that are emerging in relation to what I bring into the room. So again, the focus is less on the self of the client and more on the general atmosphere. And then by the end, we compare notes. And then only at the very end, we say, well, this was about a guy called John who is 38. All of the story, the narrative, the self, the ego self, the problem is paradoxically put aside and we focus on the affect. What is missing is an exploration that will lead to transformation and that will move away with the obsession with the self in psychotherapy, which I think all orientations seem to have, even orientations that call themselves psychoanalytic and say, we value the unconscious. In the end, it's all about the self. Humanistic, even though there are always opening, so every approach has a potential for opening, but it's not made fully explicit. So humanistic, person-centered would have the organism. So the organism is an opening because it's a complex field that goes beyond the self. Psychoanalysis would have the unconscious. The transpersonal dimension would have other pointers and so forth. So what needs to happen is an expansion, a broadening of the inquiry, leaving behind the fixation with the self, with a Cartesian self. I think, therefore I am. Affect therapy is an attempt, and the way I'm doing it. I combine Zen meditation. I combine a movement practice called Bhutto. I combine dream work. So the example of dream work is done in a group. So it's no longer the notion of the dream is mine and you're going to analyze it. The dream is something like a visitation that comes from outside and has to do with the world outside, with social, political, spiritual forces at work. And so it's particularly efficacious when done in a group. It's a practice called social dreaming. So that's my attempt to, but in a nutshell, moving away from and respecting the self, but also moving away towards another area of inquiry, which I call affect.
You do have a sense of a shifting mood or a shifting atmosphere that's always kind of in flux between two people. And it can like hang heavy, or it can, feel light. And the exploration is to notice that and be curious about it.
Yes. And I would say between two people and beyond, the person coming in the room brings the whole, maybe they just read the news, they haven't slept well, there's a weather change. And I think definitely what you said is definitely part of it. Like what's happening right now? What's the general feeling right now? Also the in-between and so forth, which is a ground has been covered in other approaches, in Gestalt and so forth.
What's one Zen Koan story or paradoxical question that you love that you could leave us with?
There are several. I will stick with this one. The Koan is, how do you get out of a stone coffin? That's the question.
And what does that mean to you?
To summon all the determination, the commitment, the love of life, the desire to live, to share, even in the direst circumstance, in a stone coffin. I mean, my God, how do I get out of a stone coffin? So it's, I think it's an invitation to get out of the shackles that I put myself in, and to really live, and to have that kind of it's a lion's roar. As I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter if I am ill, if my girlfriend left me, if whatever. I'm getting out of this, and I'm going to live and do the right thing.